This is the Collector. We've been out of town for a few weeks, but we're back, and hope you're looking forward to the spooky season. We have some chilling encounters for you this evening, so let's get into it. Fear lies within. When I was 26, I'd recently took on a new job just outside of the city I lived in. It was a great move for me in the long run, but the commute to get there, well, there was no way I'd be able to do that daily, as the travel would be too much and it would be so time consuming. So, I knew before I started that moving was a necessity. As I didn't have a lot of money at the time, I was on a budget, so that's what led me to Craigslist. I thought on there, I may be able to find myself a good deal, somewhere to rent at a reasonable price. As I searched the ads on Craigslist, it didn't take me long to find a few posts in the area for rooms available to rent. One post stood out to me. Available room to rent, spacious and modern, shared bathroom. At a low price, I was determined to get in there fast and check it out. It was in an ideal area that would put me closer to the new job. Shared bathroom. I knew that implied that I would have a roommate, but at the time, that didn't bother me, as I'd had roommates before. So, the next day, I made my way to the house to check it out and see if it was any good for me. When I arrived, I saw the house was in a quiet area of town. I made my way up to the door and knocked. A minute later, the door creaked open, and I was greeted by an older man who introduced himself as Robert. He was pleasant and invited me in to check out the room. As he showed me around the place, he seemed friendly enough. He led me to the room I was looking to rent, and it was just what I needed. As I turned to talk, I noticed Robert stood right behind me, grinning from ear to ear. I moved back, startled by how close he was. He apologized and said he had trouble hearing and that's why he was so close. I had laughed it off and told him I would love to rent the room. And as we concluded our business, I was told I would be able to move in straight away. So, a day later, I was all moved into my new place. The first night was fine. Robert offered me a few beers which I accepted, and we talked. The conversation turned strange when he began to ask me some weird questions for us getting to know each other, like how tall was I, what were my religious beliefs, did I have many family left in my life, or if people knew where I lived now, and what it was that scared me. Answering his strange questions, I finished up my beer and said I was going to settle in for the night. He stared at me in silence with a stern face for a good minute before breaking into a smile and wishing me a good night. After sorting my room, I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth. On my way, I noticed Robert was in his room, thinking he must have chosen an early night too. After getting myself sorted, I exited the bathroom and made my way back to my room. As I did, I stopped, listening. I could faintly hear in the room across from mine the sound of faint crying. It was Robert's room. Keeping myself quiet, I leant in, trying to get a better listen. As I did, I could hear Robert crying and what sounded like him talking to someone. With it being muffled through the door, I couldn't hear clearly, but it sounded like he was saying, I can't do it. Knowing it was really none of my business, and not knowing who he was talking to, I was in two minds. I was about to turn a blind eye, but wanting to know if he was okay, I couldn't help myself but to call out, asking if he was okay in there. As I asked, silence fell. Footsteps made their way to the door as it slowly opened, and Robert stood with wide eyes staring at me. His expression looked less than pleased that I had checked on him. I stuttered, asking if he was okay as I could hear crying. He continued to stare at me for what seemed an age, before saying he was fine and didn't know what I had heard because there was no crying. Confused and now feeling uncomfortable with how he was staring at me, I said I must have been hearing things and apologized for disturbing him. A massive smile crawled across his face as he slowly shut the door without saying a word. I found the whole encounter strange and headed back to my room. That night I woke to the sound of banging coming from the hallway. Sitting up and looking over at my door, it sounded as if someone was stood outside my door, knocking. Freaked, I called out hello. Silence fell for a second before the sounds of running footsteps ran up and down the hall past my door. getting out of bed to investigate, as it was only me and Robert, I slowly opened my door, poking my head into the hall, looking around when, what I saw caused my heart to race. Robert was standing in the middle of the hallway, in the dark, facing my room. "What are you doing?" I stuttered, not quite knowing what was going on. As I said this, Robert turned, walking into his room and slamming the door shut. Freaked out, I shut my own door, making sure I put the lock on this time, and went back to bed, spending most of the night awake, unable to sleep after that. The next morning, before I left for the day, I confronted Robert in the kitchen, asking him what had happened last night and why he was knocking on my door. He looked up at me sighing and closing his eyes, saying he was embarrassed, but he didn't remember doing it, and that he should have mentioned that he suffered from noctambulism, a form of sleepwalking. He again apologized and said he should have mentioned it upon me renting the room. I agreed and said it is something we should have discussed, so it's not a surprise if it happens. He smiled and told me he would take my comments into consideration. Again, a strange end to our chat as he just stared, smiling at me. I left for the day, so tired from not sleeping all night, and weirded out by Robert. That night I got back, and Robert must have been out as the house was empty. Having not slept much the night before, I decided to get an early night and head to my room. I was half asleep when I heard Robert arrive home and call out for me. I replied. He said he was just checking if I was in. I replied, and that was that for the night. I locked my door from the inside, as I didn't feel comfortable knowing Robert could pretty much sleepwalk into my room at any time. Again, I was awoke that night to the sound of banging at my door. I knew straight away that it was Robert again. As my door was locked, I lay there listening, just waiting for it to pass and for him to stop. But that's when things got weird. The knocking stopped, and for a minute, silence fell, and I thought it was over. But then, at the bottom of my door, the sound of scratching began. It was like he was out there, scratching at the bottom of my door, like some kind of animal trying to get in. When that stopped, I heard him walk away, finally. I thought he'd probably made his way back to his room, and that's it. I lay there, thinking that this was not the ideal living arrangement that I had wanted. Lying there thinking I couldn't put up with this every night. Not 5 minutes had passed and Robert had returned. This time, knocking on the door again. I had just about had enough and was about to get up and try to get him to stop and get him to go to his room. But then, the knocking got harder and more aggressive. They shook the door bang after bang. I literally thought it was about to break down. My heart began to race, thinking that this was not normal. I shouted out for him to go the fuck away. After a minute it stopped, and I could hear Robert walk back down the hall to his bedroom door and slam it shut. The adrenaline was pumping through my body, and I couldn't sleep. I made my way to the door to check he was back in his room. As I unlocked it and opened the door, the colour drained from my skin. I felt physically at threat from what I saw. On the outside of my door, what I thought was banging was actually a set of knives stabbed into the door. 5 kitchen knives had been plunged into my door. Being honest with you, it scared the shit out of me. The hallway was clear, and I only had one thing in my mind, getting the hell out of there. I packed my stuff and got the fuck out of there, not willing to stay with someone who was clearly a threat and unstable. I packed up all I could and left that night whilst Robert was back in his room. The next day, I went to flag the Craigslist post and report it so that no one else addressed it. But sure enough, it was gone. Robert must have known what happened and seen that I had fled, so he removed the post before I could do so. I think back to that night and can't help but think how lucky I was there was a lock on the door. What if I hadn't locked it? Those knives could have been meant for me. Instead of the door, Robert could have come into the room and stabbed me while I slept. I only left a few things behind that night, things that can be replaced and I can live without. It seemed to me that Robert had more than a sleepwalking issue. There was something not quite right with him, and I really hope no one else falls into that position I was in. And if you're out there, Robert, let's not meet again. This event happened to me through using online platforms to promote my cleaning services, and is the reason why I will not use Craigslist to find work again. It all started from my cleaning service advert on Craigslist. I was short on money at the time, and I wasn't getting enough work in my local area, so I turned to the internet, hoping I could pick up some more hours, more work with that, and more money. I was getting desperate. I'd been told by a few friends that promoting myself online would be a good idea. Craigslist was a good platform to start off with, easy to use, and free. After getting my ad out there, I wasn't disappointed by the speed of my first inquiry coming through. Just a few hours after the advert went live, a customer reached out for my services. Their message read, "I need my entire house to be cleaned by the end of tomorrow. I will pay along with a reasonable tip once the work is done." Not really having any other options, I replied and thanked them for inquiring for my services and agreed to take the job. The customer then responded with a thank you and stated the address and time. Looking at the location, it was a good 50-minute drive from where I was, but nonetheless, I needed the money. The next day, I loaded my car with my equipment and began my route to the job. After a long drive, I arrived at the destination. The place, annoyingly, was located down a dirt road, out the way of civilization, and a 5-minute drive from the rest of town. Parking up, I looked at the location. The house itself, old and worn, was perched on a hillside. As my eyes drifted, taking in the house, it was then I noticed a figure standing on the porch, staring down at me. A man looking to be in his mid-50s. I opened my car door and made my way over, introducing myself. As I walked closer, the man did not reply. Without saying a single word or even breaking eye contact, he continued to stare at me whilst I made my way up to him. I put my hand out to shake his, stating I was there to clean the house, but he ignored it and began to smile at me. Turning slightly, he pointed inside the house, quietly mumbling, "This way." Not much of a talker, I gathered. Thinking it was slightly rude, I wasn't there to argue or make friends, so I picked up my equipment and started walking inside. As I moved past the man, he soon followed, standing right behind me, a little too close for comfort. I pretended not to notice and brushed it aside. As we stood inside, the man again, not talking much, stared at me, smiled, and then pointed to the rooms he wanted cleaning first as he mumbled where to start. Not wanting to waste any time, I began the work, but that wasn't the end of the strange behavior. When I'd started cleaning the upstairs master bedroom, he stood in the doorway, the door slightly ajar, just enough for him to be able to look through. I glanced back every now and again, and he would be there, watching me, and continuing to smile at me, as well as continuing to stare. In all honesty, this made me feel very uncomfortable and on edge, not knowing if he was watching me thinking I was going to rob him, or because he was just a freak. I put up with it for near an hour. It was relentless, non-stop staring as I did my best to clean the bomb site that was this man's home. But each time I wanted to leave a room, that freak would be standing in the doorway, waiting for me to walk past. It got to the point I could not bite my tongue anymore. I walked past him to go through to the front room when I clearly noticed him lean in and sniff my hair. I moved out of the way as I demanded that he got out of my personal space, and what he just did was inappropriate. I told him I was done, and he should please get my payment ready. Seemingly surprised by this, the man just continued to blankly stare at me, but his smile had dropped, replaced with an angered expression. He reached into his front pocket as if looking for cash. Well, that was my hope, but to my dismay, he stopped, looked back at me, and pulled his empty hand back out of his pocket. He raised his hand and pointed past me as he mumbled I was not finished. One more room. I repeated to him I was finished and wanted payment so I could get the hell out of there. But again, he said no. One more room and he'll pay me extra. Reluctantly, still waiting to be paid, I asked him to lead the way to what room we'd missed. He pointed through the kitchen, and as we entered, he pointed to the tattered door at the back, with splotches of black paint on it. I sighed, walking over with the man as his smile grew across his face again. He opened the door, and instantly, my nose was hit with a putrid, awful smell. I remember pulling away, putting my hand under my nose to block the awful, wretched smell. It smelled like rotting, or what I assume a dead animal lying in the sun would smell like. I looked down the steep stairs that led into the darkened black hole. There was no light down there. With that smell, there was no chance I was going down there. I turned to the man and stated I didn't clean basements. With this, I then heard the distinct sound of a creak and what sounded like a grunt from the bottom of the basement. Freaked out, I looked back at the man. His smile had vanished and was replaced by a look of blazing rage. His clenched teeth and wide eyes made him appear like a brute. He demanded that I got down there and cleaned the basement now, as he raised his voice. Scared shitless, at this point I knew something wasn't right, and there was something fucked up in that basement that I had no intention of finding out. I stepped back, and as I did, the man demanded that I will clean the basement. With this, my heart started racing. I didn't even want payment now, I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I apologized in a shaky breath, and told him I would not clean the basement, and I was leaving. As I sped out the room to the front door, the man, marching after me, raged how I dare waste his time, and that I get down there now. I broke into a run as the man picked up speed behind me. Before it was too late, I sprinted out the door to my car in tears. I turned to see the man standing in his porch again, smiling down at me. I started my car, a shaking mess, looking up one more time. I screamed as I saw the man sprinting towards my car. Not only that, but there was another figure in the shadow of the doorway. I put my foot down on the gas and got the hell out of there, looking back in my rearview mirror to see the man waving me off, his smile still etched across his face. As soon as I was out of there and in town, I called the police and told them the whole ordeal and that the property needed to be checked out. I never heard anything back from the police. I don't even know if my report was taken seriously and even checked out. What I do know is there was something fucked up in that basement, and something seriously wrong with that man. And what freaks me out the most, he was not alone in that house. I'm so glad and lucky I got out there when I did, and never had to find out what was in that basement. It still gives me nightmares today. I don't ever advertise on Craigslist or similar sites anymore after that incident. It has its risks, and to me, they're not worth it. So if you take anything from this, be careful out there when using online websites for work. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed these terrifying encounters. Comment and let us know what you would have done in these situations. And drop a like and share. It really helps the channel out. If you're enjoying the horror and haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We have plenty more terrifying content on the way that we look forward to bringing you. So, until next time, remember, fear lies within.